On September 26, 1969, America tuned into ABC to catch their new fall programming lineup. Then, at 8 p.m., a single image faded up and it started playing that now familiar song.
Here's the story.
And it set the stage for a completely new kind of home in America. Before this, popular television programs, many of them in black and white, were intentionally set within homes that were already familiar to most Americans at the time. Shows like Leave It to Beaver took place inside of a colonial revival structure when the style was at its peak of popularity. Interactions between those characters on the interior were framed by a typical set of rooms, like an entry foyer, the living room, or the kitchen. But the design of these spaces had more responsibility than just staging those comedic actions of the sitcom. By the mid-20th century, television had become the primary site for what might be called spatial enculturation. That's the process by which people learn about different kinds of homes and the lives that unfold inside of them. Consciously or unconsciously, the spaces on TV shape a viewer's ambitions for the designs of their own lifestyle choices and preferences in real-world architecture. So Hollywood saturated the television screen with images of American prosperity, like clean houses and stable families, obedient children, and comfortable material lives. Not only did these play well on screen, but they lined with what mid-century America wanted to believe about itself. The kitchen in particular was a critical site for this amped-up display. At the exact same cultural moment that June Cleaver commanded her kitchen full of the latest appliances, the US government staged something remarkably similar in Moscow. In 1959, Vice President Nixon brought a full-scale model of a suburban American home to the Soviet Union as part of a cultural exhibition. And he stood inside of its kitchen to argue to Nikita Khrushchev that capitalism delivered a better life.
But this competition, which you have just described, you plan to outstrip us, particularly in the production of consumer goods. There must be a free exchange of ideas.
That exchange became known as the kitchen debate, and it was broadcast on television to both Russian and American audiences. The two TV kitchens, the Leave It to Beaver one and the kitchen debate, told the exact same story, performing the same argument about American abundance. So the kitchen debate wasn't unique. It was happening almost every night. By the late 1960s, when the Brady Bunch first aired, many Americans were ready to let go of all that posturing that Leave It to Beaver was showing. So the fictional architect, Mike Brady, led the Brady family and the rest of America toward a different way of thinking about the home.
I hate the room this way.
So do I.
The most obvious shift came from the show's interior choices, the intense colors and discordant color schemes like the avocado green, the red and burnt oranges, the shaggy wool poofs, the macrame rattan wicker, all of it presented in fully saturated Kodak Eastman color. Magazines like Women's Day ran regular home makeover features, pointing homeowners toward exactly where to buy these kinds of things. This completed a circuit between the screen and the store. But there are two less obvious and I think more important shifts on display here that made their way into the floor plans of American homes. The first is that floating famous staircase. It's open, visible, and central to the entire house, and it connects the lower and upper floors without hiding a transition in any kind of corridor. Every time a child comes downstairs, they move in front of the family's whole view, all within the shared communal spaces of the home. The architecture makes privacy almost impossible.
Do you mind? This is a personal phone call.
If you're in the house, you're in the family's line of sight. Transparency between the members of the home is achieved by everyone being able to observe everyone else. And that kind of observation is true on TV or whether it's in your own home. And the Brady Bunch normalized homes with only one public space like this, which merged into what we call the Great Room today. The second Brady shift comes from the contrast of that fully connected interior and then pairing that with a home that's strangely completely sealed off from everything that's outside of it. Those sliding glass doors from the kitchen, they just only turn the backyard into an extension of the interior. It's not really an external environment. The privacy fence and that funny astroturf seal it further. This house is a suburban fortress that's facing completely inwardly. The Brady house is maximally transparent within the family unit and maximally opaque to the outside world. And things weren't super great outside during the 1970s. The house seemed like it exists in some parallel reality where these anxieties around those external events, they don't exist at all. This is the second wave of the Cold War domestic propaganda after the Beaver home. And it's the more effective one because it doesn't look like propaganda. It just looks like a nice house. And this was a real social shift as Americans were channeling their fears and energy inward, into the home, into their families, and the suburban backyard. For those of you that lived in a city, I Love Lucy offered another even more interesting answer. When the Brady house sealed itself off from the world, The Ricardo apartment was everything the Brady house wasn't. It was rented, it was compressed, almost claustrophobically tight, and it has no backyard or obvious relief valve. That's because it was conceptually open to the city outside. The spatial compression of the apartment itself is kind of the point, because Lucy always finds a way out of whatever space is trying to contain her.
All right, I'll go get Mrs. Trumbull. I'll tell her to hurry, and then we'll go right over and tell them.
Every episode follows the same kind of arc. Lucy escapes, schemes, transgresses, and ends up in the same physical chaos. A chocolate conveyor belt, a grape vat, a television commercial that's gone wrong. With Lucy, the apartment's tightness, walkable proximity, and the street below all reflect and amplify who she is as a character. And while the Brady house made for the argument of suburban isolation, the Ricardo apartment made a pretty compelling counter-argument. They had friends upstairs, a nightclub that was around the corner, and a life that routinely spilled out over into the neighborhood. The show presented how urban rental living could provide a good life. But the show's most lasting and most adopted spatial contribution wasn't really about where you live. It was more about how you arrange the furniture inside. Because before the mid-20th century, furniture inside of a living room was often arranged in a rough circle, oriented toward conversation, or toward a piano, or toward one another. The sofa and chairs in the Ricardo apartment, on the other hand, were arranged to face the camera. And the camera occupies the exact same position as a television set would be in the viewer's home. The result is that you're watching a family arranged in the way that your family is being arranged, in a room that's organized in the way that your room is organized. The fiction and the reality mirror one another spatially, and the screen then reflects the room reflecting the screen. Television went from moving into living rooms as an intrusive box to reorganizing everything around itself. And for those who really wanted to complete the transformation for their home to become the same as Lucy's, the show made that easy too. The bedroom furniture from the I Love Lucy set, which was made by the Johnson Carper Furniture Company in Roanoke, Virginia, was sold in department stores across the US, and it was called the Live Like Lucy line. Something designed for a fictional apartment, mass-produced, and then marketed to viewers who wanted their bedrooms to look like what they saw on screen. For decades, this was exactly how things worked. Television depicted homes, viewers aspired toward them, and then manufacturers and magazines completed the transaction. You might update this process by looking at the industrial chic Friends apartment that sparked the loft conversion craze of the 2000s. It culminates in Pottery Barn's line of furniture directly from the show. The pipeline from screen to store never really closed. But man, did it become more powerful, because that industry became a more pointed and direct force on HGTV, bringing it all together in 2018. And that's when they purchased the original Brady Bunch house. The exterior of that Studio City ranch appeared in almost every single episode as an establishing shot of the Brady home. But the interior that everyone just knew to exist inside of it never really was. It was always a soundstage at Paramount Studios, and it was permanently dismantled when the show went off the air. So in a bit of nostalgic marketing genius, HGTV bought the shell and then rebuilt the pretend interior to marry the fact with the fiction. But they quickly found out just how different and divided those things were.
But in the real-life house, there was no long staircase. It actually was a smaller split-level version right next to the front door.
The renovation required adding 3,000 square feet of new space, doubling the size of the house. Because that house didn't really have a true second story, they had to build one, along with enough structural work to satisfy all the modern building codes, all to replicate a fictional space that millions of Americans already accepted as being real enough. HGTV bought that house for $3.5 million. They spent nearly $2 million more on the renovation, and then they sold it for less than they originally bought it for. The renovation actually devalued the home. But in the end, that loss doesn't really matter for entities like HGTV, because for them, the home, it's content for them. It generates revenue whether or not the real estate transaction ends up in the green. You're watching the space being built just for its own sake, with the explicit message that you should want it and you could have it. Labor costs are hidden behind all the corporate sponsorships that make materials just seem free. Complicated renovations look like they only took minutes. The financial reality of building is completely edited out of the picture. And it worked. At the height of HGTV's dominance, homes in the modern farmhouse style, that's the signature aesthetic of the channel, would actually bring in a 10% premium on home sale prices. Turn that around and you could think of it's like losing 10% if your home doesn't match up. That logic of HGTV spreads so thoroughly that it ends up completely paralyzing homeowners from being able to make any other decisions. Who wants to devalue their house? So we get a vast stream of homes heading toward the lowest common denominator of beige walls and subway tiles. And look, I don't blame anyone. I think Joanna Gaines makes all that stuff look fantastic. But in one way, we're back to the days of June Cleaver, where she presided over her immaculate kitchen, performing the ideal American domestic life. Both appear to have no agenda beyond loving their homes. They seem warm, seemingly apolitical authority. But both are producing conformity at a national scale, where deviating from any of those ideals feels vaguely dangerous, whether it's out of patriotic duty or fear of just losing money. The result is that the houses that we create in the image of HGTV, they're not really for us to live in. They're for some hypothetical future buyer who doesn't even really exist yet. You just end up perpetually living in a staging environment for an open house. You're the one who's almost on TV now. Of course, fictional television still inspires other interesting trends too. Carrie Bradshaw's walk-through closet in Sex and the City flooded new floor plans when she demonstrated how transformative it could be for her identity and putting her in control of the space.
We could make some room for it if we cleaned out your closet.
All of this time, the entanglement between media and our homes has real-world consequences. So the more we watch other people's homes, the more that ours start acting like the ones on television. And what changes is who really benefits from this transaction. A good way to counterbalance this is to join me in becoming part of something bigger. Honestly, it's a cause that I'm genuinely proud to be a part of. I'm one of more than 20,000 members that make up the Planet Wild community. We crowdfund carefully selected missions every month that go toward helping the planet. Once the project is accomplished, they send these incredibly sweet and educational videos of what's been achieved. It might be bringing back endangered species, or protecting oceans, or restoring forests, whatever it is. My personal favorite, the one that I got most excited by since becoming a member a couple months ago, it funded the construction and documented the effectiveness of wildlife crossings in the Rocky Mountains. Not only have these bridge-like structures reduced collisions with vehicles by 90%, they're just beautifully constructed pieces of infrastructure. They're designed at places where animals are most likely to cross, and they look beautiful, like the forest is liquefying up over the road. Beautiful design meets functional infrastructure gets me every time. And if you want to join our community supporting missions like this, consider joining Planet Wild. You can give whatever amount you want. Big, small, it doesn't matter. Whatever feels right to you, because every dollar counts. And since you're here and you watch this long, I have a special gift. The first 100 people to sign up using my code, Stewart4, will get their first month paid for by me. To claim your first free month, scan this QR code or click the link in the description. You'll immediately have an impact on nature, and you'll see the results in less than 30 days here on YouTube. There's no catch, you can cancel anytime with no questions asked. To see Planet Wild in action, check out their wildlife crossing missions here on the end card. Enjoy, and I'll see you next time.